Greetings! Welcome to day one of my special series, 30 Days of Halloween. Today we're going to talk about something that one of my favorite subjects about this time of the year, and that is the apple. What does the apple have to do with Halloween? Well, first of all, this is the season for the beginning of apple season here in most places. I think this is when we're harvesting apples. And so this time of the year, apples are very, very popular. We start to see apples showing up in the farmers markets, and if you're fortunate enough to live in a town, a farming community where there are apples, pretty soon you're going to start seeing farmers will be starting selling cider and apple butter and those kind of things. I have so many really fond memories of apples from when I was a child, because I grew up in Pennsylvania, and that was a big part of our fall was apples. Okay, my grandmother used to join with the ladies from her lodge, and they would don 18th century costume and go to the local fort, during the Fort Ligonier days, and they would make apple butter in a big iron kettle over a fire, and oh, it was so much fun. I have such wonderful memories. And even now I have really wonderful memories. I use apples all the time in my own cooking, and I use apples all the time in my magic. They're very important tool for a witch. And so if apples are new to you, to your cupboard, I want you to start considering. I hope I give you some ideas today of ways you can use the apple. Okay. The apple, curious enough, I found a blog that was talking about apples, and there was a quote on this blog. I'm sorry I don't know the website of the blog, but the author described this apple as, quote, the red-headed mistress of literary symbolism, end quote. She was talking about how over centuries the apple has shown up in so many stories as something that was maybe had some scandal or some things not so nice properties. It was kind of there was some questionable properties of the apple. For instance, the apple, of course, if you go into the Bible, the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, apparently the apple had the result, eating the apple had the result of separating God and man for all eternity and expelling them from the Garden of Eden. Whether you believe that or not, it never mentions the apple specifically. I don't believe in the Bible, but most artists' renderings of the Garden of Eden over the centuries have shown it to be an apple. I think a lot of the modern historians and theologians think that perhaps it was a pomegranate. It's not that important. We know that the apple has been around for millennia, thousands of years, been eaten, particularly in Asia and Europe, and of course now here in North America, very common. It's a very common food substance. We have Johnny Appleseed, the stories of Johnny Appleseed here in America. This tale of this man spreading and planting, walking all over the country, planting seeds, which was a really important job. And I remember reading about the story, and as a child thinking, oh, that's really cool. Well, they had all those apples to eat. But now I realize as an adult, he was planting apples from seeds. He was planting not seeds to be eaten. Those apples, to get a specific kind of an apple, you need to have a grafted apple. It has to grow from a graft on a tree rather than the seed. The seed will grow an apple, but you don't know what kind of an apple you're going to get. It's going to be different from the apple that it came from, a different kind of apple. I think every seed is going to be a little bit different. What he was planting, what Johnny Appleseed was planting, were apples to be used for cider, which is a very cool thing. I have great memories of cider, again, fresh cider, getting it from the farmers. As a child growing up, I look forward to cider every year, coming into Trader Joe's, the unfiltered cider, which is so delicious. And I remember as a child, it was fun, always trying to get a hold of somebody's cider. They had stuck it out on the porch to keep a hold of whatever. there was always some cider. After a while, that cider would turn hard, and that was a great treat when we could get a hold of some of that as kids and imbibe in some of that cider that started out as a very interesting drink, but eventually turned alcoholic as it aged. The story of Snow White. Think about the story of the witch and Snow White. She uses the apple to administer poison to Snow White. So the apple shows up so many different places. It has actually a lot of magical properties that we should pay attention to. It is a very potent ingredient in love spells, and fertility spells, and longevity spells. For fertility, spells, you can use, there's a very common, oh, and it's just on top. Isn't that interesting? I got my hoi polloi. I pulled my hoi polloi deck, and I meant to find the card, and I did not do so, but it was right on top, which is kind of funny. But it's the Empress card. We're all familiar with in the tarot, the Empress. And there's a very common fertility spell which uses a combination of the fertility card in this, if you want to call it that, in the tarot. We call it sort of the fertility because she's usually, not always, but very often in the Rider-Waite version, she's represented as a pregnant female in the decks. It's a sign of fertility, so it could be for fertility for humans. It also could be for fertility for, a garden, or for any project that you want to have to grow. Using a combination of the goddess card, some candles, maybe incense perhaps, and apples. Apple slices, very often used. Making a circle on your altar table or whatever your spell table, with the Empress card in the center, surrounded by apple slices, and candles, and burning incense, and using that for the stage for your spell to be set. Personally, if I was going to do that kind of a spell, I would certainly not hesitate to do it. I don't need fertility I'm not looking to have a child. But I would dry the apple slices first. And we're going to talk about drying apples a little bit later in the video, so I'll go over that with you at that time. Okay. So, if you want to talk about a spell for wisdom, to bring wisdom or clarity to a situation, you might want to drink the juice of an apple. If you want to have a spell to help you fight addiction or some kind of temptation, addiction, I would say not like a drug addiction, something that serious, you want to do more than a spell, but something like you want to quit smoking, or you want to lose weight, or whatever habit that you would like to get rid of that you're having difficulty with. Using apples, burying the apple along with some tobacco, and burning a candle every night for a full cycle of the moon, getting with the new moon, and every night, and you feeding that spell. Remember, we talked about feeding the spell a couple times. Every night until the culminating at the full moon. Okay. There's other things that we use the parts of the apple for. The seed of the apple. Oh, first of all, the blossom of the apple. If you would dry the blossom of the apple, that's a really good incense. It's a very sweet smelling incense, and that's good to use. You can also take the seeds from the inside of the apple, dry those, and then crush those to a powder and use those in an incense. Some people just dry the seeds and then carry the seeds in a mojo bag, or witch's purse, or whatever you want to call it, or hang that like you've seen me hang those bags here both in my home and out for my chickens. They're great protection, very good for protection. We can also use, particularly a green apple, are very good for prosperity or abundance spells, money spells. The color green, if you want to bring that into your life, use the green apple. Okay, you can do sort of the same thing. You can use a tarot card or not. Use other, bringing other elements you would like to in your spell, but include a green apple in your spell somehow. or the seeds from a green apple, or the or the peel for the green apple. Okay. Now, I want to just real quickly, this is a short video, hopefully today. So I'm going to show you something about the apple, what I'm going to be doing with the apples today specifically. But I wanted to just tell you that apples have a long history of being tied with the underworld. Apples are a favorite food, supposedly, for the dead. And at Samhain particularly, a lot of people use apples. I include myself in that, my husband and I in that. We always have an apple on our altar. We do it Mabon usually too, but at Samhain we put it on the altar, and we cut the altar apple. We eat of the altar apple, a bite of it each, and then we take that apple and we bury it out in the front of our home for the dead, as the veil thins and the dead. This is a time where we might be able to communicate with some of our ancestors and things. So we leave that there for libation for them. And also, I want to say it reminded me, I was just reminded when I was getting my equipment out for this video, I was getting things together for the video. I was reminded of, I was reminded of the knowledge, I have had this knowledge. Some people believe that if you fall asleep, the apples are very connected with the world of the fairies as well. And some people believe that if you fall asleep under an apple tree, that you could be taken away by the fairies. So you're cautioned against doing so. And I was real sort of excited to hear that, because that reminded me of one of my very, very favorite songs that we used to sing in our troop within the SCA. It was, we sang the text of the song, the lyrics of the song. The song was written to a poem, a 13th century poem entitled Sir Orfeo, which is this story, tells of the story of the king, English King Orpheus, whose wife, Herodes, was taken away by the fairies, and he had to rescue her. It's a really, really epic poem, one of those epic poems. It's very, very long. But the part that we used to sing about with our troop was the part about her initially going into the Undertida. It's called Undertida. It's written in Middle English, and we sang it in Middle English, but I have a translation, of course, for it. But it's such a beautiful story. It's a very haunting story, and it talks about this, of course, is when the veil is very thin. And I've mentioned before that the veil is very thin at Samhain, but it's also very thin at Beltane. Okay, at Beltane. So it's the opposite in the wheel of the year. It's the opposite. And this story took place in Beltane. It says, we fell so in the commencing of May, in the beginning of May. And so it talks about that. When myriad hot is the day, and away both winter showers, and every feld is full of flowers. Blossom of Brahma on every bough, there waxeth Miri. And now it was beautiful, the flowers were blooming, and the sun was shining. And it talks about Queen Dama Herodes, who took two maidens of priests, who took two of her most favorite maidens, and went into the Undertida, into the late, it was like late morning, and to play in an orchard theta, the side of an orchard, kind of an orchard, to see the flowers spread in spring, and to hear the flutes sing, to hear the birds, and to see the trees, and to just enjoy the day. They were just out for a picnic. And she sat him down on thray under a fair impetre. She lay down and sat down with her maidens underneath an impetre. And an impetre is a handsome grafted tree. So we're talking about it in May. We're talking about a grafted tree. What did I just say about what kind of a tree would be in the orchard, blossoming, setting some blossoms in the middle of summer, the fragrance of those blossoms, setting the fruits. What kind of a tree would we be talking about? It's an apple tree that she's talking about. She sat them down all three under the fair apple tree, and well soon in this fair plain fell asleep upon the grain. Very soon she fell asleep. Okay. The maidens dared not to wake her, but allowed her to lie and take the rest, and she slept well into the afternoon. And in the mid-morning, it was entirely past, but soon she woke up, and she clamored, and she was crazy. She went crazy. She started tearing at her hair, and she started tearing at her clothing and tearing at her face, and she went mad. And her husband, they took her back. The maidens picked her up and took her back to the castle, drove her back to the castle. And they tried to make sense of what she was telling them. She was telling them that the king of the fairies had come to her and was going to take her away. And they didn't believe her. They thought she was, crazy. They thought she was like a nut job, right? And well, what happened was the next day she went back out. She went back out into the Undertida, back out in the next morning, went out into the orchard, and was not seen. She was taken away by the fairies. And that's the beginning of the poem, and that's a lovely story. Oh, it's very haunting. Of course, sung in Middle English, I have to say, is just beautiful, sung in Middle English. But I think about that all the time, how cool that is. That was a 13th century poem. Right? We're talking about, in the 1200s, 800 years ago. This is 800 years ago. They were talking about these apples having these kind of flowers. So it was well beyond that. It was well, longer ago than that. So I'm not going to be casting any spells today, and I'm not going to be sleeping under an apple tree anytime soon. I wish I could, but I'm not anytime soon. But one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use some apples to show you something that coming up with the apples. Over this 30 days of Halloween, you're going to see the apple come up several times because, of course, being the apple season. But there's a lot of things that I like to do with apples that I'm going to share with you. But I'm going to just change the angle of the camera so that I can show you what I'm going to do right now. I hope I've got this adjusted right. It's hard for me to tell. But I'm going to do something today that I said I was mentioning that we could, that maybe if you're going to use apples in spell work, you might want to dry them first. And so I'm going to be putting some, I have my my tray from a dehydrator here. And I'm going to be cutting up some slices of apples. And I'm going to be drying them, and because I'm going to show you something. But first I want to show you if you cut an apple, if you take an apple and you cut it, you can see that, instead of cutting it from stem to stem, from the top of the apple, from the stem to the bottom, if you cut it across what they call the equator this way, inside you see the pentagram. See the pentagram inside. So, we call that, it's like, some people try to call that a flower, but witches consider that to be a pentagram. A five-sided star. And many people call the Granny Smith apple the witch's apple because usually, sometimes, it depends on the kind of apple you have, but supposedly it has a really good, see, it's not as fat. This is a little flowery looking. It's still a five star, but the pentagram within the Granny Smith apple is really, it's thinner and it looks more like a star. So many people call the green Granny Smith apple a witch's apple. Perhaps they call it because it's a granny apple and everybody knows grannies are witches, whatever. Or it could be because it looks like a star. Or it could be because the Granny Smith has a lot, like I said, is a very, very strong magical, well, all apples are magical. It seems to be a little more potent in its magic, okay? So if you just take this apple that we cut that way and you cut carefully, it's a little hard because the Granny Smith is hard to cut. Oh, and I'm going to cut myself, I can see. Cut rings, cut slices about how wide is that? Well, I'm going between an eighth and a quarter inch. I didn't go I didn't go very straight. But anyway, I want rings that I can lay in my dehydrator. There, that one's better. That's about a quarter inch. I think that's a quarter inch. I wouldn't go any thicker than that. But what's going to happen is when I put this in the food dehydrator, it's going to dry up, and then we're going to be able to use this for things. If we want to use for spells, we can keep this in a jar. We can keep it in a jar like I do the same thing with citrus fruits to use those. But one of the things I'm going to do with these apples is I like to use these apples, these dried rings, on my Yule tree. I hang them on the Yule tree. What do they have to do with Yule? What do they have to do with Yule? Well, they have a lot to do with Yule for me, because if you are celebrating Samhain and not just Halloween, you will know it. Maybe if it's a spiritual practice for you, you will know that at Samhain, well, now even at Mabon, the god has died and gone into the under the other world too. He's descended into the other world. He's dead. Okay, but we know he's coming back, and we know he's coming back because the seeds of the seed that will become the seed of the god is already implanted within Necrone, the goddess who is now the crone at this time of the year. She has the seed inside her, and that is really a really lovely thought, because when we think of a crone, we think of an old shriveled up woman. Well, the old shriveled up, when I said this in my video the other day, the old shriveled up fruits are the ones that have the greatest seeds very often. So she holds that seed of the god within her, where he will come back and be born again. When is he born? At Yule time. So this is like the star, like the Christian's version almost of the star. And so I take these rings when they're dried and I store them, and then at Yule they will come out and they will go on my Yule tree. Okay, it's real fun. My family likes to see those. I also put orange slices on my tree, which you will see those as well. Okay, now I only do these as far as I'm still getting that star in the middle. Once I get to past the star, I'm going to use the rest of this apple. I'm going to use the rest of it for, I'm going to make some apple cider vinegar out of the rest, okay? Which I can show you about that another time. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you today. That's what I'm laying the slices in the dehydrator, and you don't have to have a dehydrator. I'm just going to dry them. I want them leathery. I don't want them any moisture to remain at all. I want them, nice and dry. If any moisture is going to remain in them, they're going to mold. So I want to get them nice and dry. If you do not have a dehydrator, and I just use a low setting on my dehydrator. If you do not have a dehydrator, you can do the same thing and use your oven. I just use the lowest oven setting, or you can do it at like a 200 degree Fahrenheit oven. But if you're going to have a 200 degree Fahrenheit oven, since ovens fluctuate so much in temperature, I would crack the door open a little bit. I wouldn't close it the whole way. I think you're safer just to go on your lowest setting. I think on my setting, my oven, it goes to 170 or 160, I'm not sure what. And then I would just put them in a single layer on in a sheet pan, and I would just dry them, maybe turning them over, like dry them for a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours, and just turn them over every once in a while, maybe every 30 minutes, until they are dry as you want them to be. And there you have it. And then you can store those in your cupboard, or you can use at Yule, or to use in spells. You can also, when you have when it open, you can also pop the seeds out and save your seeds and dry your seeds and grind those seeds up to use as an incense powder, or save the seeds, put them in a jar, and they when they're dry, and use those for protection talismans. Okay? Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow. I wish you blessings.